Yeah, good morning. I guess the time is 3:28. This is probably gonna be the first video of what will most likely be a very formal, more formal at least in terms of dress code type of space that I'm trying to create. This has been, I think, 3 to 5 years in the making. It's something akin to what I would call conversations with the chairman. Um, or a beautiful mind is one of the ideas I've also toyed with at times, and the idea has always been to share some of the conversations that I've had with a lot of brilliant young old people, and some of the places where they've really taken my mind, and to put that up for your benefit, as well as for my historical benefit. You know, some of these conversations are once in a lifetime. Some of them invoke ideas that I never ever think of. Um, and so each time I have one of these conversations, at the end, I always just feel a sense of, you know, you could almost say a sense of loss as to, my God, this would have been so beautifully captured, and it would have been nice to see this perhaps as a TED talk or as a what do you call it? Yeah, or as a YouTube um, video. Yeah, I'm just putting on my watch because yeah, otherwise I lose track of time. Yeah, that looks a bit better. Um, but yeah, I'll cut it short, and obviously as the episodes go, I'll probably get better at this, and I'll probably be a lot more organized and well prepped. But I think one of the things that I wanted to put on here is a conversation that I was having with a gent called Schabo. Went to Monash together. He was junior to me. Not so junior that I would think he's a young kid. At least not when I speak to him. That's not what I think. Just junior by virtue of the fact that sometimes you'll be a year or two ahead of somebody, and that's it. And then yeah. But the more I talk to the gent, the more I appreciate how much he's able to get me to think of certain things in terms of business, and just how much value can be had or created in just simple conversation about everyday things. Um, and I think, as I said, this has happened quite often with a lot of people, but it's very rare, at least, that I get to the level where I decide, what, let me finally do this. And that's why I decided to do it ashy as I look, um, patchy as I look. If I look tired, um, then yeah, got a lot of work to do on the side of exercise and diet and that sort of thing, because I actually woke up to work. But weird in life, I woke up about 3-4 hours ago, and there hasn't been much work going in, simply because of this conversation. And I think the conversation started where he posted a picture of Sisang Ebulani, and the caption there was no BE, no tender, no government assistance, just a hardworking graduate who turned 10,000 rand salary into 400 million rands. And he has a way of always doing this, where essentially he'll make a very good point about, in this case, about hard work and how you can literally achieve anything if you set your mind to it, and just tainted with all these I'll call it superlatives, that make it seem outlandish. And the reason I always engage on these is because I'm a fan of making things accessible to people. And one of the ways of making things accessible to people is in simplifying and not overly complicating or grandiosing or that sort of a thing. So I'm the type, when I read a 0 to 100 story, say, of an entrepreneur, I will look for what were the actionable steps to there, and then how can we replicate those. I won't necessarily just look to say, look, this is what this person achieved 0 to 100. Wow, recapile, we live amongst kings. I respect people's hustles, but equally so, I respect people enough to say, you know what, if this is something that is replicable, then let's make it known to people, because I believe, as Naval often says, that wealth is not a zero sum game. I can be wealthy while you can also be wealthy. It's not necessarily that if I win, you lose. It's not that type of game. And certainly, there are a lot of those little games inside wealth creation, but overall, wealth is a positive sum game. I win, you win, and then our two wins equals three and not two, right? So my response to that was to laugh and then say, "Okay, bro." And then his response was, "I knew you were coming for me." And then he says, "But that's what he says, and I'm not saying this is a norm, but he must be recognized, and he's heavily concentrated in property." So I give a bit of background and my experience with the gent to say I know him. I've been an investor in his companies. Um, yeah, and I can say, look, he's similar to Aliko Dangote. I would agree that government is not the first thing that comes to mind when you speak of such people, but to say absolutely no government involvement is a bit of a stretch. And he asked me a very relevant question. So you can confirm that he's received assistance, whether a tender, financial aid, etc. And then he thinks he's taunting me and says, "But when you list your companies, people will be saying the same thing about you when you list your companies. That, yeah, we can't say that there was no government assistance." And look, the first thing I concede is that, look, if he's the one that's saying there's been no government assistance, I am a huge fan of the primary source of information telling us their truth, and I'll always rather respect that. I think for me that's a lot better than a rumor, newspapers, what have you, and I'll give that first merit. I will still exercise my professional skepticism, and then I'll give an example. So I say to him that people that say the same for me, they'll be well within their rights. They have every right to question if I made it myself or there was any government assistance. And the reason is simple. I've been privileged to audit government, to audit all the mechanisms that I've wanted to audit in government, and they all center around the same thing. What is the state of small business intervention in the country? So I've chosen the type of audits I'd like to have, and government has paid for it for me to be there to do their work. But because I put in some extra, I made sure that I learn as much as I can from that. And so I go on to say that, so government may have never given me a cent, may have never given me a business or a contract, what have you, but I don't think I would say there's been no government involvement whatsoever. The hardworking young man, Kokasi, that starts what I start, won't be able to reach the places I've reached simply because I've had the privilege of being able to work for government. And I say the reason why I fight that hard is because it creates the mindset that says that if he could do it, then why can't you? And as I've just stated, that's why you can't. The other thing that I also want to be very careful of is creating the impression that everything is so rosy that our government has made it possible for you to achieve anything. I'm a huge fan of the government and the work that it has done, but I also am not ignorant to some of the complaints that I've heard and cries that I've heard people make out there. And so I want to just also recognize those. But then I go on to say, it's like how one of the podcasters was advised, McG, that you mustn't create a stigma where government mutual wealth creation is frowned upon. There's no, I personally, I don't think there's any honor in entrepreneurs or business owners that say I did it by myself, there was no government assistance or what have you, because it creates the impression that government money or government created wealth is dirty. And that could be no further from the truth, at least in as far as we try and recognize what business excellence means, right? For example, I mentioned there that the likes of Apple, Facebook, Amazon, etc., you name it, government laid the hard ground for them, and the continuous disassociation with government by young prominent business owners is misleading, because then you then socialize the costs of running a business, i.e., government made it possible, for example, for there to be delivery systems, roads, internet. They even laid out the infrastructure, and sometimes people think that we are just giving government undue credit. Government actually did a lot to make sure that you don't have to incur a lot of the costs of the true cost of what it takes to create your product. Your product is building on top of something. It's building on top of infrastructure that was already in place. And then you then come and privatize the profits. So you make, let's say, whatever, X amount over and above the true cost of the product. People, the taxes paid for their product to be rolled out, but then you get to keep the bulk of the profits, and obviously they get their taxes in that regard. And then we make it seem as if, no, this is self-made and what have you. And I'm saying let's shy away from that, because then we can start to come up with creative ways that government can actually do a better job in their capital allocation and enabling of markets. I'll give you an example. I'm speaking from Guyana at the moment, or Malamulele, right, Limpopo North area. And there is so much that the people here have achieved. Yet there's so much more that I feel they can achieve if we had a lot more intentional capital allocation on the part of government. And so it's those sort of things that I just wanted to put out there, you know. I want to see what else we can take out of this conversation. I know it essentially turned eventually. So I explained to him that, so he asks me, what was the question that he asked? I'll tell you now. Yes, they did. They laid it hard for almost everyone, right? Question. And then he's saying, meaning the playing field amongst black people, give or take, is equal. And my response is that in the States, yes, the playing field for black people is equal. It might not be good, but it's equal for everybody, right? In South Africa, we still have a very long way to go. And then I expand to my network, right? And I say, even with that network, it's still difficult for me to make it. So I can only imagine the person next door, right? So meaning that it's not an equal playing field. And then he says, Bathong, bro, so it's tough, eh? Why is it difficult? Are you trying to break into traditionally white spaces, or are you carving out your own path? So in South Africa, we have a history, race history, so it's very easy to tap into black, white. It says a lot more than just the words themselves. So are you carving your own path? And I say I'm carving my own path with one company, and then trying to go into traditionally white spaces with two other companies that I've got. And I say it's tough because there's no direct deposit that translates network to cash. You still have to find ways to monetize. Everyone can tell you're creating value and have value as a network, but turning it into cash is an exercise of scope debal. It's a traditional game that we used to play as kids, where you're trying to kick the ball as hard and far as possible. They roll it to you and you kick it, and then your team runs to the other side and scores points, something like that. And then, so he says to me, so the narrative network equals net worth is not entirely true. And I say from there, it's a chicken and egg scenario, right? It's that truth where you don't know which comes first. And he then says, practically, which is better, the network first, or first going after the money? If it were up to you, which would you invest more time in? And I explained to him that, look, I've spent 12 years building a network and a knowledge base. So already I've made my decision. And I say it'll always look greener on the other side. And that's the reality. It's life, At the end of the day, we're all just trying to make money and then keep our money. So whether you make money first and build the team later, or you build the team and then try and go for money later, it always just looks green on the other side. What I can say though is that it's very hard to make money without a team, right? And if you succeed at doing it, it's very hard to keep that money, right? Remember, again, we go back to the very top. We're trying to speak about the 0 to 100 story and how it can be practicable for you and I. You see, if you and I can make $1 million today, That's fine. That's the easy part. Chances are one of us is not going to keep the million, or both of us. So, how do we come up with a sustainable way to make the million and keep it? You don't want to have to be lucky twice, as Bright Family was famously once said, on the Twitter streets. Um, and that's what I even gone to say to him. It's hard to build a network and then go broke. In the same way, it's hard to make money without a network and then to keep it. And then he asked, do you need a network initially if your product is that good? And he gives an example of two sneaker brands that have popped up in South Africa, Batu and Drip. And I said, the challenge you have in academia, and I said at home as well, is that academics and professionals make money by themselves. And I also then go back and I say, trust me, Batu or Drip is like 5% product and 95% networking. A network meaning marketing, distribution, legal, everything else. And he says, to my point of academia, my point exactly, he didn't need a network. He's an advocate for a high income scale. And I respond to that look, it's very easy relatively to make money from your own skill. Go to school, get a good job, make money. It's very difficult for your family to keep it. It's even near impossible for you to retire once you've done that, because now your standard of life will have to drop drastically the moment you stop earning. Typically what happens when you have a high skill is that you go from high skilled employee to high skilled self-employed. Self-employed, you take on a lot more accountability. However, you still are the business and it's still difficult for you to, for example, take a holiday, right? And as I speak, I just see a WhatsApp from my little brother came in. Like, these kids don't sleep, eh? Like, it's almost 4 a.m. Sleep. This is the only time I get to work. And then he says to the Batu situation, yes, but the product that will sell like hotcakes had to be there. They tried many shoes and failed. It had to be those specific designs. If you give people what they really want, is network important in the beginning? And yeah, so we're having two conversations at the same time at this point, but they'll converge later on, so just bear with me. And he says, but is the professional truly diversifying, or they're diversifying, right? If they're diversifying and investing, why should it drop? And I mentioned there that, look, it's near impossible to build a network around a professional because they tend to mistrust everything that gets near them, since you don't know the people's true intentions. That's the common saying that we have. And that hardwiring is already done. It's difficult to learn how to build a network and to build a team at 52 after you've made the money, right? And the reason why I call it hardwiring or hard whatnot is because, and you'll see later on, you have to be able to build into your system waste. And one of the best ways to do that is to play team games. In a team game, you have players that sometimes won't be able to play at your level. At other times, everybody will play at your level and all things are good. The thing about a team is that you learn to win despite the waste. And that is what it takes to build a business. You need to be able to succeed despite people taking shortcuts, despite people gaming your systems. But what that does for you as the owner of the system is that it gives you trust over that system. It gives you trust over the fact that even though there are these inefficiencies built in, even though people won't always be at 100%, we're always going to meet our goals and ultimately win the game. And you don't have that as an individual. As an individual, yes, you may procrastinate, whatever, but all of those confidences, you're getting them about yourself. And unfortunately, this is a team sport. You need to rely on more than just yourself, Yeah. So I mentioned that, and then I said even the diversification. I mean, an individual puts 100,000 rand in stocks and the rest in primaries, residences, and pensions. These are all individual assets. So you buying a house in Pretoria, Joburg, Durban, Cape Town, Nigeria for that matter, and saying that you're a property investor doesn't make you diversified. It just means you have a whole lot of primary residences. If you travel to Nigeria, you'll have a home. If you travel to Limpopo, you'll have a home. If you travel to New York, you'll have a home. That doesn't mean you've diversified. That just means that you've bought property all over the world. Again, compared to what? Compared to allowing yourself to be able to make money despite you performing or not performing. And this is what I say about systems, that I try and make myself redundant in that system. I try and make sure that the system doesn't need me to succeed. That for me is true diversification, right? um so yeah, I mentioned that, and I call it a poor man's diversification strategy. On the product that will sell like hotcakes, I say lol, and then I say there's a reason we'll never run out of celebrities, but the media monopoly never changes. Producing the celebrity or the genius product is the easy part of the machinery. The hardest part about Nike is not the shoes, it's the brand machinery, you know. It's the ability, once the design has been drawn, once the design has been made, no matter how it looks, to be able to repeat it in front of the customer's eyes, to be able to quickly send it to manufacturing, to be able to manufacture it at the lowest cost and ship it at the highest quality, to be able to yeah, all of those things. Make sure it's available in UK size 7 and US size 49, and make sure that those metric systems speak to one another. Be able to make it available in Chinese, Soto, you know, you name it. That's the difficult part, right? And then he says there that essentially the individual diversification strategies I provided an example of. He says, hey man, that's risky. I actually have the same issue with people around me. He said the reality is that it's a no work, no pay strategy. You have a situation where people haven't been on holiday for the longest time, and that's because the first thing that comes to mind is how much money they'll be losing per day while on holiday. While other people, on the other hand, again, in the same scenario, they think that workers will sell the stock once he's not there to monitor them. And I said, you're 100% correct. That's what happens if you've built a lifetime based on you as the system, right? And so I elaborate for him, right? I say those people just built wrong. I said the time to build systems for all those incidents was when the money making machine was still small. That's when you learn to trust the system. So the selling of stock, let it happen, but let it happen while you're still $1,000 business, so that you can see, we call it your operating leverage, or not even operating leverage, yeah, your sensitivity levels, margin of safety. How much stock can you lose before you start to make losses, right? And yeah, on the issue again, the two conversations, and we're still gonna converge them. And I said to him that if I were to do this whole thing again, I'd study marketing and distribution. And this is regards to the Nike brand and the Batu and Drip. Repetition can overcome even the most stubborn of walls. And I asked him, are you telling me that Yeezys look good? And he says, hell no. And I say, yeah, I also don't think so, right? But what happened was Kanye had the marketing to repeat it often, to explain what the thinking behind it. And the minute you start to understand something, you start seeing it for what it is, and not necessarily for the unexplained version of it. And then distribution, the idea that you can or can't own it if you wanted to, makes it a lot more real product, and you're more willing to buy it or whatnot, right? Okay. On the hell no, yeah. So I explained the Yeezy example, and I say, yeah, on the Batu Drip thing, I said to him that I think they just hit the mark on the minimum good enough product that can fit into a business machinery, and then that machinery ran at full speed. I said the true design capabilities will come out when they no longer need to feed the stomach and or break even. Then they can show their true mind and the ideas that they had. I honestly think so. That still takes away nothing from the business. In actual fact, I think it's sometimes overrated to be able to fully express yourself, especially in business. If you're able to make the minimum good enough product and keep improving on that, for me, that I think that's good enough and that's sustainable. And I mentioned that to him, that when I invest in an entrepreneur, I'm not looking for them to reinvent the umbrella. I'm looking to see if they have what it takes to create a product that people can get their hands on without thinking about it, and then that they can do that for the next 50 years. The best products only exist in textbooks. I'm looking for product market fit. And I was humbled at how I then went to that's industry jargon, but besides industry jargon, how naturally that came to me in this conversation to say that, look, I'm just looking for a level of the product that meets what the customer currently is willing to pay for, because the customer won't understand the best product. You have to ease, I always say to my team, you have to ease the customer into it. So you have the iPhone in mind, but before you get to iPhone, what you then do is you release the iPod so that you get people comfortable with pause, play, skip, rewind. Then you remove 80% or 90% of the keyboard, so you can press the home button, you can increase volume, you can lock screen, and then you remove the home button completely, and then now you've got a touch where the home button was, and then eventually you even remove that touch, and then now you just swipe up and swipe down. You easing people into a phone with no buttons, and I'm a firm believer in that. And let them direct you. The best version of the product, often customers reject. You have to walk them there, you know. For example, there's a famous analogy where they say Apple used to have, after you take a picture, they used to say pinch to zoom in and do that to zoom out, and it would literally show you those arrows, and you got comfortable. Now naturally, all of us, when we get a picture that isn't clear, want to see what's in the background, like my water bottle there, you then zoom in like that without nobody telling you to pinch or to zoom. I've even seen situations where people try to zoom into magazines, but that's for another day. So he says to me then, back on the parents that built wrong, right? The time to build systems for all of those incidents, so people stealing from you, and the fact that when you take a holiday, your money takes a holiday. He says, so automating a business is not that easy. How do you automate a surgery, a tavern, a guest house? And he says, bearing in mind that majority of customers are black and all are situated in areas where cash is the order of the day. People don't swipe, bruh. Again, that reference to our history and its effects. And to that I say to him, remember, systems are not automation. And this is where now all these conversations converge into what then brought me to recording this, because I just felt this was so valuable that at some point I have to record this and then start having these conversations. And I said systems are not automation. Systems is a set of processes that self-regulate. Flaws are prevented or detected and then corrected within the system. When it's human beings, only then you put in incentives for the behavior you want and controls for the behavior you don't want. And I said, let's give an example. I said the thing that taxi owners got right is to put in the check-in mechanism. Taxi owners in South Africa are notoriously known for, essentially they give the vehicle to the driver, so let's say an Uber, and they say, look, for me, every day you just bring back my vehicle with whatever, $100 and a full tank, right? And I said what this does is that it gives clear deliverables and leaves enough incentive for the driver to meet their own selfish goals. So if you only want $100 and a full tank, everything else I make above that belongs to me. So I will push the asset as hard as possible. However, the control they've put in place is that if you damage the vehicle, or if I have to incur too many unnecessary maintenance costs, then you're fired and I get a more careful driver. And essentially that's an incentive built model that allows for everybody to have their goals met inside this conversation. And then I said to him, for example, as the accountant of the people that you speak about above, right? Your job is to calculate a break even and a hurdle rate, i.e., how much does it cost for them to meet their monthly expenses, including buying new stock, and then how much profit would they like out of this system, and not the maximum profit, just good enough profit. And in this case I said 20,000 rand profits a month, and I said let's assume that that can be covered at like 70% capacity. I said the remaining 30% can be sold for overperformance. So if your staff wants to impress you, you've left room for them to impress you. Or if they want to steal, then you've left room for them to steal without your system being compromised. And I said the important thing is that you've created enough room and incentives for your 20,000 Rand per month profit to happen uninterrupted for as long as you live without you having to be on the ground. And then you can take your holiday. If they steal some, then it's cool, as long as they don't burn the house down. And I share a book there with him, Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And I said, this is the management Bible in my companies. And he said, okay, so the aim shouldn't be to chow the entire cake. You must accept that there will be unrealized gains, i.e. theft, incentives, whatever. And he said, but this would definitely work. Systems work as intended if implemented correctly. And I said, yeah, this book, essentially OKRs are objectives and key results. That's the foundation. We need to always know what can kill us, then avoid it. Everything else becomes a bonus. And he says he'll buy the book. I said, remember, in terms of chowing the entire cake, I said, remember, otherwise you're playing an unrealistic game. Human beings will always look for ways to game the system. So make the system gameable. Just make it at an acceptable level. And I said, and also this mindset. This is the mindset of a business owner. And what's a business? A business is a set of systems, right? Versus the mindset of someone who's self-employed. Remember, someone who's self-employed is someone who's employed. They're just employed by themselves. So you're still an employee, just your own employee. Versus as a business owner, you're just overlooking and overseeing a system and creating incentives and controls for what you would like to have. And he says acceptable is the key word here. I've never thought of it this way. And he says, thanks a lot, bro. I'm calling it a night. And I'm saying it myself as well. I'm calling it a night. I actually woke up to work. But it happens sometimes that you wake up to work and then someone engulfs you in conversation. This is a conversation that happened over 3 hours. I think, as you can tell, I was reading it off my screen. I was just, paraphrasing, that sort of a thing. But I thought it had enough nuggets in it that pushed me to finally say, you know what, whatever time it is, whatever I still plan to do, I can see it's 4 o'clock now on the time. I'm going to end and wrap up in the next 3 minutes. Just record it, put it out there, and then let's have a conversation around these things. Let's see where we can go with it. I don't know what the title is, but I think something along the lines, government or no government, build systems. And I think that's that. Thanks for bearing with me. As I say, this is the first video, so sound is probably gonna sound trash. Lighting is probably worse than I think it looks. My articulation, my speech is probably nowhere near polished. I don't have the high pitch. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and like, that sort of a thing. I don't know how I feel about that. I think that's probably also one of the reasons I've taken so long to record these things or to start these conversations. And it's because I don't know if I want it to be a please subscribe and like platform, but I also do understand the nature of the media machine as it's been created. I think for me what's important is to get this information recorded and stored somewhere other than in my head, and that makes it easy for all of us to retrieve it, including myself. There will be days when I'm not as smart as I am today and I will need to take my own advice, but for today I guess I'm lucky enough that I've had an audience, and this is something that perhaps we can have a chat around. Let's build systems. Let's use incentives. Let's put controls in place, and let's make sure that we leave enough cream at the top for other people to come in and also realize their goals and their dreams. You know, people that work for you have put their goals and dreams on pause and decided to follow yours for a while because you give the most compelling version of what feeds them today. But make no mistake, they are still looking for opportunities, and they will look for opportunities to build their own thing and have their own thing in future. And your job is to make sure that that happens without your cake being compromised. It's Chairman Mo, aka Lesser Shamtiane, and I'm out.